The low grey sky hung over a quiet neighborhood in the early hours of the morning. A woman watched the yard through the kitchen window as her baby crawled on the wet grass. Silently, the baby moved toward a fence covered in dry leaves, his eyes fixed on a hidden spot. On the other side, a mud-covered female dog's snout emerged from the vegetation, panting and trapped in a shallow hole. The mother stepped forward, then stopped upon seeing the scene while the baby remained still, not making a sound. As the rain returned, mud ran down the sides of the hole while puppies stirred below. A sharp scream from the child cut through the air at the very moment. Water entered the den, but what happened next? No one will ever know. Love stories with animals? Then subscribe now and don't miss any. Thanks for following us. Now, back to our story. Something in the air felt different that morning in Maplewood, a peaceful suburb of Portland, Oregon. The sky hung heavy with dark clouds, casting a soft but tension-filled light over the neighborhood. Sarah Matthews stood at her kitchen window, absently stirring her morning coffee while keeping a watchful eye on her 15-month-old son, Ethan, who was exploring the backyard. Their home, a modest two-story with white siding and blue shutters, sat nestled among similar houses with low fences and well-maintained gardens. The Matthews family had moved to Maplewood just 3 months ago, drawn by its reputation for safety and community spirit. Sarah's husband, Daniel, a software engineer who worked from home, was still upstairs on a conference call. The move had been good for them, a fresh start after years of cramped apartment living in downtown Portland. The spacious backyard was one of the main selling points, giving Ethan room to grow and play. Sarah smiled as she watched her son. He had mastered crawling recently and was becoming more adventurous each day, exploring the yard with determined curiosity. But over the past week, something had caught Sarah's attention. Ethan seemed drawn to a specific corner of the yard, near the old wooden fence that separated their property from an undeveloped wooded area behind the house. It wasn't just casual interest. He would crawl directly to that spot with unusual purpose for a child his age. "What keeps catching your attention over there, little explorer?" Sarah murmured, pressing her palm against the cool glass of the window. She had checked the area herself a couple of times, but found nothing particularly interesting. Just some tall grass, fallen leaves, and the weathered fence. This morning, however, Ethan seemed even more fixated than usual. The way he stared at that corner, it was almost as if he could see something Sarah couldn't. He sat perfectly still, which was unusual for such an active child, his gaze locked on the fence line. Sarah placed her coffee mug on the counter and stepped onto the back porch. A cool breeze carrying the scent of impending rain brushed against her face. "Ethan, honey, what are you looking at?" she called softly. Ethan didn't turn around. Instead, he started making soft, cooing sounds and patting the ground excitedly with his tiny hands. Sarah had never seen him react that way before. Something about his behavior sent a small shiver down her spine. Not fear exactly, but a strange feeling that something significant was happening. She stepped onto the damp grass in her slippers, making her way toward her son. As she got closer, she noticed a slight movement on the other side of the fence, barely visible through the gaps in the wooden slats. Instinctively, she quickened her pace. When she reached Ethan, Sarah knelt beside him and followed his gaze. What she saw made her heart skip a beat. Through a small gap beneath the fence, partially hidden by overgrown grass, was the unmistakable snout of a German shepherd. The dog looked exhausted, its fur matted with dirt and its eyes reflecting a desperate fatigue. "Oh my goodness," Sarah whispered, her hand automatically moving to pull Ethan back. But her son didn't seem frightened at all. If anything, he appeared completely at ease, babbling happily, as if greeting an old friend. The dog wasn't aggressive either. It simply lay there, watching them with intelligent eyes that seemed to hold a silent plea. Sarah hesitated, torn between caution and curiosity. That's when she noticed something else. The ground around the fence appeared disturbed, as if someone or something had been digging. "Daniel!" she called out, her voice carrying through the open kitchen window. "Daniel, I need you out here." Upstairs, Daniel was wrapping up his morning meeting when he heard Sarah's call. He quickly made his excuses and ended the video conference. "Coming!" he shouted, rushing down the stairs and through the kitchen. The urgency in Sarah's voice propelled him forward, concern mounting with each step. When he reached the backyard, he found Sarah and Ethan by the fence, both focused on something he couldn't yet see. "What is it? Is everything okay?" he asked, slightly out of breath from his dash downstairs. Sarah motioned for him to approach quietly. "Look," she whispered when he knelt beside, "in them. There's a dog under there. I think she might be stuck or injured." Daniel peered through the gap and saw the German Shepherd. The dog's eyes met his, and Daniel felt an inexplicable connection. He had grown up with dogs his whole life, before moving to the city for college and work. There was something about this particular animal that stirred old memories and instincts. "She doesn't look feral," he observed. "Probably someone's pet that got lost. But what's she doing under there?" His question was answered moments later, when the dog shifted slightly, revealing her true purpose for being there. Behind her, barely visible in the shadows, was the distinct shape of a tiny puppy. The German Shepherd had given birth. "She has puppies," Sarah gasped, her concern immediately deepening. "And with these clouds—" She glanced upward at the darkening sky. "Daniel, if it rains hard, that whole area could flood. It looks like she dug a den under there, but the ground is already saturated from yesterday's downpour." Daniel nodded grimly. "We need to help them." Just then, the first raindrops began to fall, scattered and light at first, but quickly gaining intensity. The timing couldn't have been worse. The German Shepherd seemed to understand the danger too, as she rose shakily to her feet and tried to nudge one of her puppies farther under the fence, toward the Matthews yard, as if seeking safer ground. "She's trying to bring them to us," Sarah said, amazement clear in her voice. Ethan, still sitting calmly beside her, reached out a hand toward the fence, babbling excitedly. Daniel stood up, determination settling over his features. "I'm going to check if there's a way around this fence. We need to see exactly what we're dealing with." As Daniel jogged along the fence line, looking for access, Sarah noticed their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, peering curiously over from her adjoining yard. "Everything okay over there, Sarah?" the woman called, pulling her cardigan tighter around her shoulders as the rain began to intensify. "We found a dog with puppies trapped under the fence," Sarah explained. "I think they might be in danger if this rain gets any heavier." Mrs. Henderson's expression changed immediately from curiosity to concern. "Wait right there," she said firmly. "My late husband was on the neighborhood watch for 20 years. He kept records of every pet in a 5-block radius. If she's from around here, I might know who she belongs to." As Mrs. Henderson hurried back into her house, Daniel returned, his expression grim. "There's no easy way around," he reported. "The fence continues into that densely wooded area, and the other side backs up to a drainage ditch that's already filling with water." He looked at the increasingly heavy rainfall with growing alarm. "We're going to need help, and fast." Sarah reached for her phone only to realize she had left it inside. "I'll call animal control," she said, starting to stand. But Daniel placed a hand on her arm. "That might take too long," he said, "and they might separate the mother from her puppies." He looked at Ethan, who was still transfixed by the dog's presence, then back at Sarah. "I think we need to handle this ourselves, with some help from the neighbors." The rain continued to fall, growing heavier by the minute. Thunder rumbled in the distance, a warning of the storm that was fast approaching. Sarah could see the fear in the German Shepherd's eyes now, a mother's fear for her children. In that moment, Sarah made a decision. You're right. Let's get as many neighbors as we can. Mrs. Henderson is already checking if anyone around here knows this dog. Daniel nodded, the rain now soaking through his shirt. I'll start knocking on doors. You take Ethan inside and grab you some towels, blankets, anything we can use to keep the puppies warm once we get them out. As Daniel rushed toward the front of the house, Sarah picked up Ethan, who immediately began to protest, reaching back toward the fence and the dog behind it. I know, sweetheart, she whispered. We're going to help them, I promise. The German shepherd watched them go, her eyes never leaving Ethan until they disappeared inside the house. Something about that gaze, so intelligent and trusting despite the dire circumstances, told Sarah that this rescue would be just the beginning of a much more remarkable story. Inside the house, Sarah quickly gathered supplies while keeping an eye on Ethan, who was fussing in his playpen. She understood his distress. Somehow he felt connected to what was happening outside. She worked efficiently, piling old towels, blankets, and a plastic storage bin that could serve as temporary shelter for the puppies. Through the kitchen window, she could see activity building in their yard. Daniel had rallied several neighbors who were now appearing with shovels, flashlights, and determined expressions, despite the increasingly heavy rain. Mrs. Henderson had returned as well, holding a large umbrella in one hand and what looked like an old photo album in the other. Sarah scooped up Ethan and the supplies, then hurried back outside under the protection of a large umbrella. As she approached the gathering crowd, she heard Mrs. Henderson speaking. Her name is Luna, the elderly woman was saying, pointing to a photograph in her album. She belongs to the Miller family on Oakwood Drive, about half a mile from here. They reported her missing 5 days ago. Poor thing must have wandered off when she was close to giving birth. The photo showed a healthier, happier version of the same German shepherd they'd discovered, standing proudly next to a smiling family of 4. Has anyone called them? Sarah asked, joining the group. A man in a yellow raincoat, whom Sarah recognized as Mike Peterson from 2 doors down, nodded. My wife is on the phone with them now. They're on their way, but they're coming from across town. It'll be at least 20 minutes. We don't have 20 minutes, said another neighbor, Gabriela Rodriguez, who worked as a veterinary technician. She was kneeling by the fence, assessing the situation. That depression she's dug out is already filling with water. We need to start digging now. The urgency in Gabriela's voice mobilized everyone. Daniel organized the growing group of neighbors into teams. Some would dig carefully from the Matthews side of the fence, while others would try to create a wider access point from the wooded area. The ground is already unstable from all the rain we've had, warned Tom Bryant, a construction worker who lived across the street. We need to be careful not to cause a collapse that could harm the puppies. As the adults coordinated their efforts, Sarah noticed that Ethan had become unusually quiet in her arms. He was watching the scene with an intensity that seemed beyond his years, his eyes fixed on the spot where Luna was visible through the fence. I can hold him if you want to help, offered Lisa Chen, another neighbor who had arrived with her teenage daughter Emma. Sarah hesitated, then handed Ethan over. He's been acting strangely about that dog, almost like he knew she was there before we did. Lisa adjusted Ethan in her arms. Children can sense things sometimes, she said thoughtfully. My grandmother in Taiwan always said babies can see things adults have forgotten how to see. Sarah had never been particularly superstitious, but something about Lisa's words resonated with her. She took a position near where Daniel and Tom were carefully removing soil from around the fence post. The rain was coming down harder now, running in rivulets through the yard and pooling in low spots. Through the gap beneath the fence, they could see Luna struggling to keep her puppies dry, moving them one by one to a slightly higher spot within her makeshift den. The sight broke Sarah's heart. We need to hurry, she urged, feeling a new sense of desperation. On the other side, Of the fence, Mike and two other neighbors had managed to clear enough brush to reach the edge of Luna's den. The hole she had dug was deeper than they'd initially thought, extending well under the fence line. "I can see at least 5 puppies," Mike called out, his voice barely audible over the rain and thunder. "They look like they're only a few days old. Their eyes aren't even open yet." Gabriella pushed her way forward, rain dripping from her ponytail. Luna's exhausted and probably dehydrated. She's been trying to protect those puppies without food or proper shelter for days. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small packet. "I brought some beef jerky from my emergency kit. Let's see if we can gain her trust." With gentle movements, Gabriella extended her hand through the cleared area, offering the jerky to Luna. The dog sniffed cautiously, then took the food with delicate care, her eyes never leaving Gabriella's face. "Good girl," Gabriella murmured. "We're here to help you and your babies. You're safe now." Luna seemed to understand. After eating the jerky, she moved back slightly, as if making room for the humans to assist. It was an extraordinary display of trust from an animal in such a vulnerable position. "I think she knows we're trying to help," Daniel said, amazement evident in his voice. Tom had managed to loosen the fence post enough to create a wider opening. "We should be able to reach them now, but we need to move quickly. That water level is rising faster than I'd like." As if punctuating his words, a flash of lightning illuminated the scene, followed by a crash of thunder that seemed to shake the very ground beneath them. Several of the neighbors jumped, and from Lisa's arms, Ethan let out a startled cry. Luna responded immediately to the sound, her head jerking up in alarm. She locked eyes with Ethan across the yard, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fade away. The connection between the baby and the dog was palpable. "I've never seen anything like that," Mrs. Henderson whispered, voicing what everyone was thinking. The moment was broken by a worrying sound, the trickling of water becoming a rush as a small stream formed along the fence line, heading directly for Luna's den. "Now!" Daniel shouted. "We need to get them out now." Tom and Daniel worked together to create an opening large enough for a person to reach through. Gabriella, with her experience handling animals, volunteered to be the one to retrieve the puppies. "Luna knows me a little now," she explained. "She might be less frightened if I'm the one reaching for her babies." Everyone agreed, and Gabriella positioned herself by the enlarged opening. "I'll hand each puppy out," she instructed. "We need towels ready to dry and warm them immediately." Sarah organized a line of neighbors to receive the puppies, each person armed with a towel. The plastic bin she'd brought out earlier was quickly lined with blankets and positioned under an improvised shelter made from tarps and garden tools. Gabriella took a deep breath and reached carefully into the den. Luna watched intently, but made no move to stop her. With gentle hands, Gabriella lifted the first puppy, a tiny, wet bundle of dark fur, and passed it to Daniel, who quickly wrapped it in a towel before passing it to the next person in line. One by one, the puppies were rescued, 5 in total, each small enough to fit in one hand. They were all alive, squirming weakly, but showing signs of fight despite their ordeal. Each was dried, checked briefly by Gabriella for any obvious health issues, then placed in the warm, dry bin. Luna grew increasingly agitated as her puppies were removed, whining and pacing in the shrinking, dry space of her den. The water was now ankle-deep where Gabriella knelt. "We need to get Luna out too," Gabriella said urgently. "She's too exhausted to climb out on her own, and that water is rising fast." Tom and Daniel exchanged concerned looks. "The opening's not big enough for her to fit through," Tom said. "We'd need to remove the entire fence post, and in this saturated ground that could cause a bigger collapse." "What about from the other side?" Sarah suggested. "If we could dig a gradual slope up from the den, she might be able to climb out that way." Mike and the neighbors on the wooded side immediately began implementing Sarah's idea, digging frantically as the rain continued to pelt down on them. Everyone was soaked to the bone, but no one complained or suggested giving up. From Lisa's arms, Ethan watched the entire operation with unusual focus. When all 5 puppies had been safely transferred to the bin, Lisa brought him closer so he could see them. His small face lit up with delight, and he reached out a hand toward the tiny creatures. "Gentle, Ethan," Sarah cautioned, though she needn't have worried. Her son's touch was feather-light as he stroked one puppy's damp fur. The sound of an approaching vehicle caught everyone's attention. A blue SUV pulled up at the curb, and a family jumped out, a man, woman, and 2 children around 10 years old. "That's the Millers," Mrs. Henderson confirmed. "Luna's family." Jennifer Miller ran toward them, her husband Robert close behind. The relief on their faces when they spotted Luna was profound. "You found her! Oh, thank God!" Jennifer cried, tears mixing with the rain on her face. Robert immediately joined the digging effort on the wooded side, working alongside neighbors. He'd never met to save his dog. "We've been searching everywhere," Jennifer explained breathlessly to Sarah. "Luna disappeared right before a storm last week. She was due to have her puppies any day, and we were so worried. The kids have been devastated." The Miller children had made their way to the bin of puppies, their expressions transforming from anxiety to wonder as they counted all 5 tiny forms. "They're all alive," the daughter whispered in awe. "Dad, Mom, all the puppies are okay." "Thanks to your neighbors," Jennifer said, emotion thick in her voice. "I don't know how we can ever repay you all." "Let's get Luna out first," Sarah replied with a smile. "Then we can talk about repayment." On the wooded side, Robert, Mike, and the others had finally created a gentle slope leading up from the den. The water was now flowing steadily into the depression, but they had managed to build a path above the waterline. "Luna!" Robert called, his voice carrying the special tone reserved for beloved pets. "Luna, come on, girl, come on up." Luna's ears perked, up at the sound of her owner's voice. She took a hesitant step toward the newly created exit, then another. With each step, her confidence seemed to grow. "That's it," Robert encouraged. "You can do it, girl." With one final effort, Luna scrambled, up the muddy slope and into Robert's waiting arms. A spontaneous cheer erupted from all the neighbors, quickly followed by applause. Even the rain seemed to celebrate, easing from a downpour to a gentle shower. Luna, though clearly exhausted, managed to wag her tail weakly as Robert carried her around to the Matthews yard where her puppies waited. When he set her down beside the bin, she immediately began inspecting each puppy, nosing them gently and licking their tiny forms as if counting them and ensuring they were all present and unharmed. Sarah found herself moving closer to Daniel, who wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "That was something else," he murmured. She nodded, watching as Ethan, still in Lisa's arms, observed the reunion with rapt attention. It really was. What had started as a typical morning had transformed into something extraordinary, a testament to the power of community, instinct, and the unique bond that sometimes forms between the most unlikely companions. The days following the rescue brought a flurry of activity to Maplewood. News of the dramatic event spread quickly through the neighborhood and beyond, turning what had been a collection of polite but distant neighbors into a tight-knit community bound by their shared experience. The Matthews home became an unofficial hub for visitors wanting to check on Luna and her puppies. The Millers had accepted Sarah and Daniel's offer to keep the new mother and her litter in their garage, which had been hastily converted into a comfortable nursery. A veterinarian had examined all 6 dogs the evening after the rescue and pronounced them remarkably healthy considering their ordeal, though Luna needed fluids and extra nutrition to recover her strength. "I still can't believe how everything lined up," Jennifer Miller said on the 3rd afternoon, sitting with Sarah at the kitchen table while Robert and Daniel monitored the puppies. "If Ethan hadn't been so drawn to that spot in your yard." Sarah nodded. watching her son, who was seated on a blanket near Luna's bed, babbling happily as the exhausted mother dog kept a watchful eye on both her puppies and the human child. "It's like he knew," she replied softly, "even before we did." Through the kitchen window, Sarah could see several neighbors in the backyard working together to repair the fence and improve the drainage in that corner of the property. Tom Bryant had taken charge of the project, volunteering his expertise and materials from his construction company. Mike Peterson and his teenage sons were helping, along with several other neighbors Sarah was still getting to know. "Your neighborhood is amazing," Jennifer commented, following Sarah's gaze. "We've lived in the same house for 8 years, and I barely know half the people on our street." "We didn't either until 3 days ago," Sarah admitted. "It's funny how a crisis brings people together." The doorbell rang, and Sarah excused herself to answer it. On the porch stood Gabriela Rodriguez, the veterinary technician who had been instrumental in the rescue, holding a large box filled with supplies. "I brought some more puppy formula, specialty food for Luna, and a few toys my clinic was going to donate to the shelter," she explained, stepping inside. "How's our mama doing today?" "Much better," Sarah replied, leading her toward the garage. "She's more alert, eating well, and very attentive to both the puppies and Ethan. It's almost like she's watching over him too." Gabriella smiled knowingly. German Shepherds are incredibly intelligent and form strong bonds. Luna probably understands that Ethan played a role in saving her family. In the garage-turned-nursery, Luna greeted Gabriella with a gentle tail wag, recognizing the woman who had helped rescue her puppies. Robert and Daniel were seated on folding chairs nearby, deep in conversation, while Ethan remained in his spot, on the blanket, completely content. "So what made you decide to name them after planets?" Gabriella asked, noticing the small color-coded collars on each puppy, each tagged with a handwritten label. Robert laughed. "The kids' idea. Since the mother is Luna, they thought a space theme made sense. So we have Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn." He pointed to each puppy in turn. "We're letting the kids take the lead on this one, since they've been so worried about Luna." "Speaking of the kids," Daniel said, "how are they handling the idea of finding homes for the puppies when they're old enough?" A shadow passed over Robert's face. "That's going to be tough. They're already attached, especially to little Jupiter. He's the runt of the litter, but our homeowners association only allows 2 dogs per household, and we already have an older retriever at home, besides Luna." Sarah, who had been listening from the doorway, felt a familiar tug at her heart. She and Daniel had discussed getting a dog for Ethan eventually, but hadn't planned on it so soon. Yet watching her son's obvious connection with Luna and her puppies, she wondered if perhaps the timeline needed adjustment. The conversation shifted as Jennifer joined them, and soon the garage was filled with the pleasant hum of new friendships forming. Sarah excused herself to prepare more coffee, but paused in the kitchen, struck by how quickly life could change. 3 days ago, these people had been strangers. Now they were sharing coffee in her kitchen, working in her yard, and helping care for 6 dogs temporarily housed in her garage. The sound of more vehicles pulling up outside drew her attention. Through the front window, she saw Mrs. Henderson emerging from a car, driven by a woman in her 30s. Her daughter, Sarah, guessed. Behind them, 2 more cars parked, and several people carrying covered dishes made their way to the front door. When Sarah opened it, Mrs. Henderson beamed at her. "Hope you don't mind, dear. I mentioned at church this morning about the rescue, and some folks wanted to help out. We thought a little potluck might give everyone a chance to meet properly instead of just passing shovels back and forth in the rain." Before Sarah could respond, Lisa Chen appeared with her teenage daughter Emma, carrying a large pot that emanated delicious aromas. "We brought dumplings," Lisa announced, "and Emma made lemonade." Overwhelmed but touched, Sarah welcomed them, And this is so thoughtful, she managed, emotion catching in her throat. That's what neighbors do, Mrs. Henderson said simply, patting Sarah's arm as she passed. Or at least it's what neighbors should do. Within an hour, the Matthews home was hosting an impromptu neighborhood gathering. The living room, kitchen, and backyard were filled with people from all walks of life, united by their part in Luna's rescue or their desire to support those who had helped. The Miller's children arrived with their father, immediately rushing to check on the puppies and show off their dogs to admiring neighbors. Amidst the pleasant chaos, Sarah found herself standing beside Daniel on their back porch, watching as neighbors chatted, laughed, and shared stories over paper plates of potluck offerings. "Are you okay with all this?" Daniel asked quietly, slipping an arm around her waist. "It's a lot of people." Sarah leaned against him, surveying the scene. Tom Bryant was explaining something about proper fence support to a group of interested listeners. Mike Peterson's sons were playing catch with the Miller children in the side yard. Mrs. Henderson sat in a lawn chair holding court with several older neighbors, gesturing animatedly as she recounted the rescue from her perspective. "I'm more than okay," Sarah replied honestly. "I feel like we've lived here for years, not months." Daniel nodded. "Me too. And Ethan seems to be thriving with all the attention." Their son was indeed the center of attention for many of the visitors who had heard about his role in discovering Luna. Currently, he was being entertained by Emma Chen and her friends, who had organized a small circle of admirers to watch him demonstrate his crawling skills. "He's going to miss all this when things go back to normal," Sarah mused. "And he's going to miss the puppies when they find new homes." Daniel was quiet for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Would it be crazy to consider keeping one?" he finally asked. "I know we said we'd wait until he was older, but after what happened, it seems almost meant to be." The question hung between them, unresolved but full of possibility. Before Sarah could answer, they were joined by Gabriella, who held a sleeping puppy, Mars, identifiable by his green collar, against her chest. "I have a proposition for you both," she said without preamble. "The shelter where I volunteer needs foster families for rescue animals. After seeing how well you've handled this situation, I wondered if you might be interested. It wouldn't be a permanent commitment, but it would help prepare animals for their forever homes." Sarah and Daniel exchanged surprised glances. "We've never had pets before," Sarah admitted. "I wouldn't know where to start." Gabriella smiled. "That's the beauty of fostering. We provide training, supplies, and support. You provide love and a temporary home. And based on what I've seen, you have plenty of love to give." She glanced toward Ethan, who was now being carried back toward the garage by one of the Miller children, presumably to visit Luna again. "Plus, your son is a natural with animals." The idea took root in Sarah's mind, expanding with surprising speed. It wasn't what they had planned, but then again, very little about the past few days had gone according to plan, and the unexpected turn of events had brought so much richness to their lives already. "We'll think about it," Daniel promised, sensing Sarah's interest. As evening approached, the gathering began to wind down. Neighbors helped clean up, exchanged phone numbers, and made plans for future get-togethers. There was talk of a neighborhood watch program, a community garden in the vacant lot 2 blocks over, and a group text chain to coordinate efforts for those in need. By the time the last guest had departed, leaving behind only the Millers who were staying to monitor Luna and her puppies overnight, Sarah felt a profound sense of contentment. She found Daniel in the garage, sitting on the floor beside Ethan, who had finally succumbed to exhaustion and fallen asleep next to Luna's bed. "Should I move him?" Daniel whispered. Sarah shook her head, taking in the peaceful scene. Luna lay, curled protectively around her puppies, but she had positioned herself so that her body also formed a partial circle around the sleeping child. One of the puppies, Jupiter the smallest, had somehow migrated from the pile of his siblings to nestle against Ethan's leg. "Let them be," she said softly. "I think they're all exactly where they need to be." Jennifer Miller, who had been quietly observing from the doorway, stepped forward. "You know," she said hesitantly, "Robert and I have been talking. We can only keep Luna and one puppy according to our HOA rules. The others will need good homes in about 7 weeks. She paused, looking meaningfully at Jupiter, the tiny runt, who seemed so content beside Ethan. "If you were interested in one of them, I think we know which one already has a special connection to your family." The offer hung in the air, full of possibility. Sarah looked at Daniel, who smiled and gave a small nod. "We'd be honored," Sarah replied, her voice thick with emotion. "But are you sure? Your children might have other ideas about where the puppies should go." Jennifer smiled. "Actually, it was Zoe's idea, our daughter. She said Jupiter belongs with Ethan because they found each other before anyone else did. And she's right. Sometimes connections like that shouldn't be broken." As if sensing he was being discussed, the tiny puppy yawned and snuggled closer to Ethan, who in sleep reached out a small hand that came to rest on Jupiter's soft fur. "I guess that settles it," Daniel said quietly. "In 7 weeks, we'll officially be a family of 4. Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes, tears of joy, gratitude, and wonder at how quickly life could change course. 3 days ago, they had been a family finding their way in a new neighborhood. Now they were part of a community, with new friends, new responsibilities, and soon, a new 4-legged member of their family. Outside, the rain had stopped, and the evening sky was clearing to reveal the first few stars. The air smelled fresh and new, like a world washed clean and ready for new beginnings. Sarah took a deep breath, letting the peace of the moment settle over her. Whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, they would face them together, as a family and as part of something larger than themselves. 7 weeks passed in a blur of activity, marked by frequent visits to the Miller's home, where Luna and her puppies had returned once the mother dog had regained her strength. Each weekend, Sarah and Daniel would bring Ethan over to spend time with the growing puppies, particularly Jupiter, who seemed to recognize them instantly, his tiny tail wagging frantically whenever they arrived. As the day approached for Jupiter to officially join their family, Sarah found herself both excited and anxious. The Matthews had spent weeks preparing, puppy-proofing their home, researching training methods, consulting with Gabriella about proper care, and slowly accumulating the necessary supplies. Daniel had even taken a week of vacation time to help the puppy adjust to his new surroundings. "Are we overthinking this?" Sarah asked one evening, as she and Daniel sat on their back porch. They had just finished installing a custom-built doghouse in the corner of the yard, the third design Daniel had created after deciding the first 2 weren't quite right. Daniel laughed, running a hand through his hair. "Probably, but isn't that what new parents always do?" He paused, his expression growing more serious. "And that's what we'll be, sort of like new parents again. Jupiter might be a dog, but he's going to be part of our family." Sarah nodded, understanding completely. Over the past weeks, she had watched the puppies develop from helpless newborns to energetic little explorers, each with a distinct personality. Mercury was bold and confident, Venus sweet and affectionate, Mars independent and curious, Saturn dignified and calm. And then there was Jupiter, smaller than his siblings, but somehow more determined, with an uncanny ability to focus on human faces and an especially gentle manner around Ethan. "I think he chose us as much as we chose him," she mused. The following morning dawned bright and clear, Jupiter's homecoming day. Ethan seemed to sense the significance of the occasion, unusually alert in his high chair as Sarah fed him breakfast. "Today's the day, buddy," she told him, wiping applesauce from his chin. "Jupiter's coming to live with us." Ethan responded with an excited babble that included one recognizable word: "Pup." It was a new addition to his limited vocabulary, having appeared shortly after the rescue. When they arrived at the miller's home, they found the family in the backyard with all 5 puppies, who were now roly-poly balls of energy, tumbling over each other in play. Luna watched from nearby, still attentive, but more relaxed about letting her offspring explore. The scene was bittersweet. 2 of the puppies, Mercury and Venus, had already been matched with new families and would be leaving the following weekend. Mars would be staying with Jennifer's sister, who lived across town, and Saturn would remain with the Millers alongside, Luna completing their 2-dog household. Jupiter's been extra excited this morning, Zoe Miller informed them solemnly. I think he knows. Sarah watched as the smallest puppy broke away from his siblings' play to approach Ethan, who was seated on a blanket on the grass. With delicate care, Jupiter climbed onto the blanket and immediately curled up against the boy's leg, looking up with soulful eyes as if to say, I'm ready when you are. Robert handed Daniel a folder containing Jupiter's vaccination records, care instructions, and a small album of photos documenting the puppy's first weeks of life. We wanted you to have these, he explained, so Jupiter will always know where he came from. Jennifer added, and we hope you'll bring him for playdates sometimes. Luna might get worried if she never sees him again. Of course we will, Sarah assured her, touched by the thoughtfulness. We're practically neighbors, and after everything that happened, I think we'll always be connected. The actual moment of departure was both easier and harder than Sarah had anticipated. Jupiter seemed perfectly content to be placed in the special carrier they had brought, sniffing curiously at his new surroundings without any sign of distress. Luna, however, approached the carrier and pressed her nose against the mesh, whining softly. It's okay, girl, Daniel said gently, kneeling beside. The mother dog. We'll take good care of him, I promise. Luna looked at him for a long moment, then at Sarah and Ethan, before giving Jupiter one final nuzzle through the carrier. Then, with what almost seemed like a nod of approval, she stepped back, allowing them to leave. The drive home was quiet, with Jupiter sleeping soundly in his carrier, apparently lulled by the motion of the car. As they pulled into their driveway, Sarah noticed a small group gathered on their front lawn. Mrs. Henderson, the Chens, Gabriella, and several other neighbors who had been part of the rescue. Surprise! Lisa Chen called out as they exited the car. We wanted to welcome the newest Matthews. Sarah laughed, tears springing unexpectedly to her eyes at the gesture. You all didn't have to do this, she protested weakly. Of course we did, Mrs. Henderson replied firmly. It's not every day a hero dog comes to live in the neighborhood. Hero dog? Daniel questioned, carefully lifting Jupiter's carrier from the back seat. That's what everyone's been calling him, Mike Peterson explained. Smallest of the litter, but the one who made the biggest impact. If he hadn't formed that connection with Ethan, who knows what might have happened to Luna and the others? Sarah hadn't thought of it that way before, but it made a certain kind of sense. Although Jupiter himself had been in danger, it was his presence, his very existence, that had ultimately led to the rescue. She watched as Daniel set the carrier down on the grass and opened it, allowing the puppy to emerge into his new world. Jupiter took a tentative step out, then another, his nose working overtime to process all the new scents. When he spotted Ethan, who was being held by Lisa, his entire body wiggled with excitement. I think someone's happy to be home, Gabriella observed, smiling at the puppy's enthusiasm. The informal welcome party lasted about an hour, with neighbors taking turns greeting Jupiter, offering advice and presenting small gifts. A hand-sewn blanket from Mrs. Henderson, a set of biodegradable chew toys from the Chens, a custom ID tag from Tom Bryant that read, Jupiter Matthews Hero Dog. Datum. The last neighbors departed, promising to check in later. Sarah stood in the doorway, watching Jupiter explore his new yard with Ethan crawling close behind. Daniel slipped an arm around her waist. "Happy?" he asked simply. Sarah nodded, leaning against him. "More than I would have thought possible a few months ago. It feels right, doesn't it? The four of us?" Daniel's answer was interrupted by a small commotion in the yard. Jupiter had discovered the doghouse and was cautiously peering inside, while Ethan, determined not to be left out, was attempting to crawl up the small ramp Daniel had built for easier access. "Whoa there, explorer," Daniel called, hurrying to intercept his son before he could follow the puppy inside the structure clearly built for canine dimensions. "That's Jupiter's special house, not for little boys," Ethan protested with an indignant cry, reaching toward the doghouse where Jupiter now sat in the entrance, head tilted in confusion at the commotion. "I think we're going to need some ground rules," Sarah laughed, joining them in the yard. "Lesson 1, Ethan doesn't live in the doghouse. And Jupiter doesn't sleep in the crib," Daniel added with a grin. As if understanding, Jupiter trotted over to Ethan and gently nudged his hand, as if offering consolation for the denied adventure. Ethan's frustration immediately melted away, replaced by delight as he patted the puppy's soft fur. "Then again," Sarah mused, watching the interaction, "maybe they'll figure out the rules on their own." The rest of the day passed in a pleasant blur of new routines and discoveries. Jupiter proved remarkably adaptable, quickly learning the boundaries of his new home and settling into the rhythms of the Matthews household. By evening, it felt as though he had always been part of their family. After Ethan had been put to bed, with Jupiter watching attentively from his nearby dog bed, though Sarah suspected the puppy would attempt to join Ethan once they left the room, she and Daniel sat in the living room, marveling at how smoothly the transition had gone. "I was so worried," Sarah admitted, "about whether we were ready, whether Jupiter would be unhappy away from his mother and siblings, whether Ethan might accidentally be too rough. And instead, it's like they've known each other forever," Daniel finished. "Though I suppose, in a way they have, since that day in the rain." Sarah nodded, remembering the extraordinary connection she had witnessed between her son and the desperate mother dog. "Do you ever wonder why Luna chose our yard?" she asked quietly. "Out of all the places she could have gone to have her puppies, why underneath our fence?" Daniel considered the question. "Maybe it wasn't random," he suggested. "Maybe she sensed something, that there was a child here or people who would help. Or maybe it was Jupiter who guided her," Sarah said, surprising herself with the thought. Maybe he had some kind of connection to Ethan even before he was born. It was a fanciful idea, one that the logical part of her mind dismissed as impossible. Yet after everything they had witnessed, she couldn't entirely reject the notion. There were some things in life that defied easy explanation. "Whatever the reason," Daniel said, reaching for her hand, "I'm grateful it happened. Not just because we have Jupiter now, but because of everything else that came with him, getting to know our neighbors, feeling like we're really part of a community." Sarah squeezed his hand, understanding completely. "Me too." Upstairs, the baby monitor captured a soft rustling sound, followed by the delicate click of puppy nails on hardwood. Sarah smiled, imagining Jupiter abandoning his dog bed to curl up beside Ethan's crib. "Should I go move him back to his bed?" Daniel offered. Sarah shook her head. "Let them be. Some connections are meant to stay unbroken." Outside, a gentle rain began to fall, not the threatening downpour of that fateful day, but a nurturing shower that promised growth and renewal. Sarah listened to its rhythm on the roof, feeling a profound sense of rightness settle over her. Whatever tomorrow might bring, they would face it together. A family of four, bound by love, chance, and perhaps a touch of something more mysterious than either. Jupiter Matthews' hero dog had found his forever home, and in doing so, he had helped the Matthews find something they hadn't even realized they were missing: a sense of belonging, of community, and of being exactly where they were meant to be. 3 months after Jupiter came home, the Matthews family had settled into new routines that revolved around both their growing son and their energetic puppy. Jupiter had tripled in size, though he remained smaller than his siblings, who they occasionally saw during playdates at the local dog park. His coat had developed into a rich blend of his German Shepherd heritage, with distinctive markings that made him easily recognizable to neighbors who had followed his story from the beginning. Ethan, now 18 months old, had progressed from crawling to walking with surprising speed, something Sarah jokingly attributed to his desire to keep up with Jupiter. The two were inseparable, with the puppy showing remarkable patience for a young dog, always gentle with his human companion despite his own boundless energy. "It's almost like he knows Ethan is just a puppy too," Daniel observed one Saturday morning as they watched the pair in the backyard. Jupiter was carefully retrieving a soft ball that Ethan would throw, or more accurately drop, a few feet away, returning it each time with what looked remarkably like pride. "Gabriella says it's unusual," Sarah agreed. "Most puppies his age are too rambunctious to be this careful around small children, but Jupiter seems to understand exactly what Ethan needs." Over the past months, Jupiter had become something of a neighborhood celebrity. His story had been featured in the local newspaper, and a professional photographer had even asked to include him in a book about remarkable animal rescues. The attention had initially made Sarah uncomfortable, but she had come to appreciate how Jupiter's story had united their community. The impromptu potluck after the rescue had evolved into a monthly neighborhood gathering that rotated between houses. The vacant lot 2 blocks away was in the process of being transformed into a community garden, with plans for a small dog park at one end. And perhaps most significantly, Gabriella had convinced several families, including the Matthews, to become foster homes for rescue animals. "I never would have pictured us here 6 months ago," Sarah mused, sipping her coffee as she watched Ethan toddle after Jupiter. "Sometimes I still can't believe how much our lives have changed because of one puppy." Daniel smiled, sliding an arm around her shoulders. "One puppy, one incredible rescue, and one very special connection," he corrected. "Speaking of which, did Gabriella mention when our new foster might arrive?" Before Sarah could answer, her phone chimed with a text message. She checked it and smiled. "That's her now. They found a match for us, a senior German Shepherd mix who needs a quiet place to recover after surgery. She says he's very gentle and good with both children and other dogs." "Perfect timing," Daniel remarked. "Jupiter could use a mentor, and Ethan could learn about helping animals in need." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of the front doorbell. Daniel went to answer it while Sarah called Ethan and Jupiter in from the yard. When she entered the living room, she found Jennifer and Robert Miller, along with their children, Zoe and Tyler. "Sorry to drop by unannounced," Jennifer said, "but we have some news we wanted to share in person." Sarah invited them to sit, noticing the mixture of excitement and hesitation on their faces. Jupiter immediately approached his former owners, greeting them enthusiastically before settling at Ethan's feet. "What's going on?" Daniel asked, returning with glasses of lemonade for everyone. Robert and Jennifer exchanged glances before Robert spoke. "We've been offered an incredible opportunity. My company is opening a new office in Portland, and they've asked me to lead the operation. It would mean a significant promotion, better schools for the kids, and we'd be less than 30 minutes from you." "That's wonderful," Sarah exclaimed, genuinely pleased for them. The Millers had become close friends over the past months, with regular playdates for both the children and the dogs. "There's more," Jennifer added, her expression growing more serious. "The move would mean selling our house, and we'd need to find a place quickly in Portland. The market there is tight, and we might need to stay in temporary housing for a while, which could be a problem with Luna and Saturn." Sarah immediately understood the concern. Finding pet-friendly rentals was challenging enough with one dog, let alone two. "You know they're always welcome here," she offered without hesitation. "We have plenty of space, and Jupiter would love having his mom and brother visit." The relief on the Millers' faces was palpable. "We were hoping you might say that," Jennifer admitted. "It would only be for a few weeks while we secure permanent housing. We've already started looking at properties not far from here." As the adults continued discussing logistics, Sarah noticed that Zoe, the Miller's 10-year-old daughter, had grown unusually quiet. The girl was sitting on the floor beside Jupiter, her expression pensive as she stroked his fur. "Everything okay, Zoe?" Sarah asked gently. Zoe looked up, her eyes serious beyond her years. "I was just thinking about how things work out," she said. "If Luna hadn't gotten lost and found your yard, we never would have met you, and now we're going to be living close by forever." The simple observation carried a profound truth that struck Sarah deeply. So many chance factors had aligned to create this moment. Luna choosing their yard, Ethan discovering her, the neighborhood coming together for the rescue, the connection that formed between Jupiter and her son. If any single element had been different, none of them would be sitting here now, planning a future together. "Sometimes the best things in life happen when we least expect them," she told Zoe, feeling the truth of the words as she spoke them. The conversation turned to practical matters. When the Millers would need to move, how long Luna and Saturn might stay with the Matthews, which neighborhoods in Portland they were considering. Through it all, Sarah found herself marveling at how thoroughly Jupiter's arrival had transformed their lives. Not just adding a pet to their family, but expanding their entire world in ways she could never have anticipated. Later that evening, after the Millers had departed and Ethan was tucked into bed, with Jupiter, as always, sleeping on the special mat beside his crib, Sarah and Daniel sat on the back porch, enjoying the mild spring evening. "So we'll be fostering a senior dog and hosting Luna and Saturn," Daniel summarized with a chuckle, "all while raising a toddler and maintaining our jobs. Are we crazy?" Sarah smiled, leaning against his shoulder. "Probably. But it feels right, doesn't it? After everything that's happened, how could we say no?" "We couldn't," Daniel agreed. "And honestly, I wouldn't want to. It's like Zoe said, everything has worked out in ways we never could have imagined." A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the distant sounds of the neighborhood. Children's laughter from a few houses away, a lawnmower running late, the bark of a dog answered by another. Ordinary sounds that now carried deeper meaning, representing connections and community that had once been absent from their lives. "I've been thinking," Sarah said finally, her voice thoughtful, "about the day of the rescue, when all those neighbors showed up to help, people we barely knew then, who are now such important parts of our lives." Daniel nodded, encouraging her to continue. "What if we did something to commemorate that day? Not just for us, but for the whole neighborhood. Something that represents what we learned about community and connection." "What did you have in mind?" Daniel asked, intrigued. "I'm not entirely sure yet," Sarah admitted. "But I was thinking about the community garden project. What if we added something to it, a special area dedicated to Luna's rescue? Maybe with a little plaque telling the story and some benches where people could sit and reflect." Daniel's face lit up with enthusiasm. "That's a fantastic idea. We could call it Luna's Corner or something similar. A place where people could be reminded that sometimes it takes a village or a neighborhood to make a difference." "Exactly," Sarah agreed, warming to the concept. "And it could become a gathering spot for community events, or even a place where local shelters could hold adoption days. A reminder that one small connection can lead to something much bigger." As they continued refining the idea, Sarah's phone chimed with an incoming email. She checked it and gasped softly. "What is it?" Daniel asked, concerned by her reaction. "It's from that children's book author, Melissa Clark, the one who contacted us about Jupiter's story last month. She's finished a draft and wants us to review it. Sarah scrolled through the email, her excitement growing. She's included some preliminary illustrations. Oh, Daniel, they're beautiful. She passed him the phone, showing colorful drawings that captured Jupiter as a tiny puppy, alongside illustrations of Ethan, Luna, and the dramatic rescue scene with neighbors working together in the rain. The smallest hero, Daniel read from the proposed title page. That's perfect. She wants our permission to submit it to publishers, Sarah continued, and she says if it's accepted, she'd like to donate a portion of the proceeds to animal rescue organizations. The possibility that Jupiter's story might help other animals in need felt like the completion of a circle, a way of passing forward the kindness and community spirit that had brought him into their lives. We should say yes, Daniel said without hesitation. Jupiter's story deserves to be shared. Sarah nodded in agreement, her heart full as she imagined children around the country learning about the special bond between a baby boy and a puppy, and the community that came together to save a desperate mother dog and her newborns. From upstairs came the soft sound of movement, Jupiter lightly repositioning himself closer to Ethan's crib. The familiar sound brought a smile to Sarah's face. Such a small thing, a single puppy in a family of millions, and yet the ripples of his presence continued to expand outward in ways they were only beginning to understand. "You know," she said softly, "when we moved here, I was worried about finding our place, about whether this neighborhood would ever feel like home. I never imagined it would take a dog to show us the way." Daniel squeezed her hand. "Not just any dog," he corrected. "Our dog, Jupiter Matthews, the smallest hero." The name hung in the air between them, carrying all the weight of what had been and the promise of what was yet to come. Beyond their yard, the neighborhood stretched out in all directions, filled with homes and families now connected in ways that transcended mere proximity. And at the center of it all was a small German shepherd puppy who had, in his own way, changed everything. Sarah closed her eyes, listening to the peaceful sounds of their home and neighborhood, feeling a sense of contentment she hadn't known was possible. Whatever tomorrow might bring, a senior foster dog, Luna and Saturn as temporary guests, the Millers moving closer, a children's book, a special corner in the community garden, they would face it together, strengthened by the connections that had begun with one unusual friendship between a baby and a puppy in need. "The smallest hero," she repeated softly, "with the biggest impact." 1 year to the day after Jupiter's homecoming, Maplewood was bustling with activity. The community garden, once an empty lot overgrown with weeds, had blossomed into a vibrant space where neighbors gathered to grow vegetables, share stories, and build connections. At its heart stood Luna's Corner, a circular area with benches arranged around a simple stone marker that told the story of a mother dog, her puppies, and the community that came together to save them. Today, the corner was the centerpiece of a special celebration, the official launch of The Smallest Hero, Melissa Clark's children's book inspired by Jupiter's story. The event had drawn not just neighborhood residents, but people from across Portland, including local news crews, representatives from animal rescue organizations, and families interested in adoption. Sarah stood at the edge of the gathering, watching as Daniel helped Ethan navigate through the crowd, Jupiter trotting faithfully at their side. At 2 years old, Ethan was becoming more independent each day, his vocabulary expanding rapidly, though Jupiter remained his favorite and most frequently used word. The German shepherd puppy had grown into a handsome young dog, still smaller than his siblings but robust and healthy, with the same soulful eyes that had captured everyone's hearts from the beginning. "I can't believe how many people came," Jennifer Miller said, joining Sarah with Saturn on a leash beside her. The Millers had found a lovely home just 10 minutes away and had become fixtures in the Matthews' lives. with weekly dinners and regular playdates for both children and dogs. "I know," Sarah agreed, scanning the crowd. "When we planned this, I thought it would just be neighbors and a few friends, but look at all these people here to celebrate Jupiter's story." The celebration had been months in the making. After The Smallest Hero was accepted by a publisher, Melissa had suggested launching it at the site that had inspired the tale. The neighborhood association had eagerly embraced the idea, expanding it into a community event that would also serve as an adoption day for local animal shelters. Near the refreshment table, Sarah spotted Luna, now living contentedly with the Millers and Saturn, receiving admiring pats from children who recognized her from the book's illustrations. Nearby, Gabriela Rodriguez was staffing an information booth about responsible pet ownership and the importance of spaying and neutering. "Mrs. Matthews," a tentative voice drew Sarah's attention. She turned to find a young woman with a notebook and press badge. "I'm from the Portland Tribune. Would you mind answering a few questions about today's event and how Jupiter's story came to be?" Sarah smiled, still somewhat surprised by the interest their family's experience had generated. "Of course." As they found a quieter spot to talk, the reporter's first question caught her off guard. "When did you realize that what happened with Luna and Jupiter might be more than just a random event? That it might actually change lives beyond your own family?" Sarah considered carefully before answering. "I think it was during the rescue itself," she said finally. "Watching all these people, many of whom had never even spoken to each other before, working together without hesitation to save this dog and her puppies, there was something transcendent about that moment, like we were all part of something bigger than ourselves." The reporter nodded, jotting notes. "And now, a year later, you have a published children's book, a dedicated space in your community garden, and this event has brought together 6 different animal rescue organizations. Did you ever imagine such an impact?" "Never," Sarah admitted with a small laugh. "We were just trying to help a dog in trouble. Everything that followed, the friendships, the community. Building this book, it all grew organically from that one moment of connection." "Connection seems to be a recurring theme in Jupiter's story," the reporter observed. "Between Jupiter and your son, between neighbors, between the community and these rescue organizations." "Exactly," Sarah agreed, warming to the subject. "I think that's why people have responded so strongly to this story. In a world where we often feel disconnected, Jupiter reminds us that meaningful connections can happen in the most unexpected ways, if we're open to them." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of microphone feedback. Daniel was standing on a small platform near Luna's corner, preparing to address the gathering. Jupiter sat attentively at his feet, unnaturally still for a young dog, as if he understood the significance of the moment. "Thank you all for coming today," Daniel began, his voice carrying across the now quiet garden. "A year ago, our family was still new to this neighborhood, still finding our way. We hadn't yet met most of you, hadn't yet become part of this incredible community." He glanced down at Jupiter, who looked up at him with complete trust. "And then this little guy came into our lives in the most dramatic way possible, and everything changed. Not just for our family, but for this entire neighborhood." Sarah made her way through the crowd to stand closer, Ethan reaching for her from where he was perched on Mrs. Henderson's hip. She took her son, feeling a swell of emotion as Daniel continued. "Luna's rescue taught us something profound about community. That when we come together, when we put aside our differences and focus on what unites us rather than what divides us, we're capable of extraordinary things, maybe even a little bit of magic." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Many present had been part of that rainy day rescue, had felt the unique energy of strangers becoming neighbors in the span of a few intense hours. Today, we're not just celebrating a children's book, though the smallest hero is certainly worth celebrating. Daniel held up a copy of the colorful hardcover, its cover featuring an illustration of Jupiter as a tiny puppy, standing protectively beside a crawling baby. We're celebrating what Jupiter's story represents: the power of unexpected connections, the importance of community, and the difference even the smallest among us can make. He gestured toward a table where Melissa Clark was preparing to sign books. All proceeds from today's sales will benefit local animal rescue organizations, helping more animals like Luna and Jupiter find their forever homes. And speaking of finding homes, Daniel pointed to the far end of the garden, where volunteers had set up an adoption area with kennels containing dogs and cats of various ages. 6 rescue organizations have brought animals in need of loving families. Our hope is that Jupiter's story might inspire some of you to create rescue stories of your own. As Daniel concluded his remarks and thanked everyone for coming, the event shifted into a festive atmosphere. Children lined up to have their books signed, families visited the adoption area, and neighbors shared food and conversation throughout the garden. Sarah found herself drawn to the adoption section, where a familiar face caught her attention: Max, the senior German Shepherd mix who had been their first foster dog after Jupiter. He was now a permanent resident at Golden Years Sanctuary, a rescue dedicated to senior pets. Despite his grey muzzle and arthritic gait, Max's eyes still sparkled with intelligence as he greeted her with a gentle tail wag. "He remembers you," said Carol, the sanctuary's director. "He always gets excited when I mention your name." Sarah knelt to stroke Max's soft head. The 3 months he had spent recovering in their home had been challenging but rewarding, teaching them valuable lessons about patience and compassion. Though they had ultimately decided he needed the specialized care the sanctuary could provide, they still visited regularly and sponsored his ongoing medical expenses. "How's he doing?" Sarah asked. "Better than expected," Carol replied with a smile. "The treatments are working, and he's been a wonderful uncle to some of our more nervous newcomers. He has a real gift for calming anxious dogs. Like Jupiter with Ethan," Sarah thought, marveling at how dogs seem to instinctively understand what others needed. She had witnessed it repeatedly during their fostering experiences over the past year. 6 dogs and 3 cats had passed through their home, each leaving paw prints on their hearts before moving on to permanent placements. "Have you had any interest in him today?" Sarah asked, hoping that somehow, against the odds, the perfect family might have appeared for the elderly dog. Carol's expression softened. "Actually, yes. The Henderson family has been visiting with him for almost an hour. They lost their senior dog a few months ago and specifically asked about older pets needing homes." Sarah followed Carol's gaze to where Mrs. Henderson's daughter and son-in-law sat on a blanket, with Max, their 2 teenage children, taking turns gently brushing his fur. The scene brought tears to her eyes, another unexpected connection forming, another circle closing. "Sarah!" Daniel's voice called from across the garden. "Ethan wants to show Jupiter something." She excused herself, promising to check back on Max later, and made her way to where Daniel stood with Ethan near the book signing table. Jupiter sat patiently beside them, his attention focused completely on the toddler who was clutching a copy of The Smallest Hero with determined little hands. "Jupiter, look," Ethan declared, holding the book open to a page showing an illustration of the dramatic rescue scene. Neighbors working together in the rain, Luna watching protectively over her puppies, baby Ethan observing from Sarah's arms. Jupiter leaned forward, sniffing the page with apparent interest, then looked up at Ethan with what could only be described as pride. The toddler beamed, patting the dog's head with gentle affection that belied his young age. "It's like he knows it's his story," Sarah marveled. "Maybe he does," Melissa Clark suggested, joining them after finishing a signing session. "Dogs understand more than we give them credit for, especially about the important things: love, family, belonging. As the afternoon progressed, Sarah found quiet moments to connect with various neighbors who had become dear friends over the past year. Lisa Chen shared updates about her daughter Emma's college applications. Tom Bryant showed photos of his new granddaughter. Gabriella introduced her fiancé, whom she had met at a veterinary conference 6 months earlier. None of this would have happened without that rainy day, Lisa observed, as several of them sat together near Luna's corner. We might have lived as strangers for years, just waving occasionally, but never really knowing each other. Instead, we became a community, Mrs. Henderson added, her voice carrying the wisdom of her many years in the neighborhood. All because a mother dog chose the right yard and a baby noticed what the adults missed. As sunset approached, the event began winding down. Families departed with signed books and treasured memories. Several left with something even more precious, a new four-legged family member from the adoption area, including Max, who would indeed be going home with the Hendersons. The Matthews and Millers were among the last to leave, lingering in Luna's corner as volunteers packed up the remaining supplies. Luna, Saturn, and Jupiter lay together on the cool grass, a family reunion that always warmed Sarah's heart. "Did you see how many animals were adopted today?" Jennifer asked, her voice filled with wonder. 17 dogs and 12 cats. Many of them older or with special needs that usually make them harder to place. "Jupiter's magic at work," Robert commented with a smile, watching as Zoe and Tyler played a gentle game of fetch with the 3 dogs. Daniel, who had been helping dismantle the signing table, joined them with Ethan sleepily resting on his shoulder. "I think we can call today a success," he said, his voice soft to avoid disturbing his drowsy son. "More than a success," Sarah replied, looking around at what they had created, not just the event or the garden, but the web of connections that now linked them all together. "It's everything I never knew I wanted until Jupiter showed us what was possible." As they gathered their belongings and prepared to head home, Sarah paused to read the inscription on the stone marker that formed the centerpiece of Luna's corner. "In honor of Luna, Jupiter, and the power of unexpected connections. May we always remember that community is built one act of kindness at a time. Even the smallest among us can be heroes when we open our hearts to each other." Simple words that captured the essence of what had begun that rainy day and continued to grow in ways they were still discovering. Jupiter trotted to her side, pressing against her leg as if sensing her reflective mood. She knelt to embrace him, burying her face in his soft fur for a moment. "Thank you," she whispered, words meant only for him, for finding us, for changing us, for showing us the way home. Jupiter responded with a gentle lick to her hand, his eyes full of the same unconditional love he had shown from the beginning. Then he turned, looking toward where Daniel waited with Ethan, clearly ready to escort his family home. As they walked through the garden toward the exit, Sarah glanced back one last time at Luna's corner. The setting sun cast long shadows across the space, but somehow the stone marker seemed to glow with an inner light of its own, a beacon of what was possible when strangers became neighbors, when neighbors became friends, and when a single, unexpected connection set in motion ripples that continued to expand outward in ever-widening circles. Jupiter Matthews, the smallest hero, had found his forever home, and in doing so, he had helped an entire community find theirs as well. Fim da Historia. Dear listeners, we hope Jupiter's heartwarming journey has touched your hearts as deeply as it has touched ours. The story of how one small puppy brought together an entire community reminds us that connections can form in the most unexpected ways, changing our lives forever. If you enjoyed following the Matthews family and Jupiter's adventure, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating Stories that celebrate the profound bonds between humans and animals. Find it by clicking to your left. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up if Jupiter's story moved you. Every day, we bring you unique narratives that explore life's beautiful complexities. Share your own unexpected connection stories in the comments below. We'd love to hear how a special animal has transformed your life or community. Join us tomorrow for another unforgettable journey. Until then, remember that sometimes the smallest heroes make the biggest difference in our lives.